What if the oldest stories humanity ever told were not myths but memories? What if the deepest fears carved into the stone of our earliest civilizations were not fantasies but warnings? Across the silent expanse of millennia, a single, terrifying narrative has been whispered from one culture to the next, a story that persists despite the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new languages, and the dawn of reason. It is a story etched into Sumerian clay tablets, painted on the walls of Egyptian tombs, and woven into the sacred traditions of indigenous peoples across the globe. This persistent, haunting tale speaks of a time of cosmic upheaval, of a great cataclysm brought by a visitor from the heavens. It describes a celestial spectre, a harbinger of change that blazed in our ancient skies, an object so brilliant, so overwhelming, it was remembered as a second sun. For generations, we have relegated these accounts to the realm of mythology, fascinating but fanciful echoes of a superstitious past. We, the children of science and enlightenment, learned to see the sky not as a canvas for gods and monsters, but as a predictable mathematical machine governed by immutable laws. We mapped the stars, timed the planets, and grew comfortable in our cosmic neighborhood. We believed we had tamed the heavens with our understanding. And then something appeared that shook that confidence, a faint glimmer from the abyss that would soon reawaken the ancient dread and ignite a firestorm of modern prophecy. It arrived unannounced, a whisper from the outer darkness. In the final days of 2019, a robotic eye, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, dutifully scanning the heavens from its perch in Hawaii, captured a smudge of light where none should be. Catalogued as C, 2019Y4, it was initially just another data point in the endless stream of cosmic information, one of countless comets on a long journey from the frigid wastes of the solar system. But this one was different. This one began to behave in ways that defied easy explanation, ways that sent a ripple of excitement and then alarm through the astronomical community. As it plunged toward the sun, it began to brighten at an astonishing, almost unprecedented rate. Calculations raw and thrilling suggested that by the time it reached its closest approach to Earth, this celestial wanderer could become one of an exclusive, legendary class of objects, a great comet. It might even grow so luminous as to be visible during the day, a ghostly pearl hanging in the blue expanse of our sky. For a few breathtaking weeks, it seemed we were on the cusp of witnessing a once-in-a-generation spectacle, a new Hale-Bopp or Hyakutake to inspire a planet. The media caught fire with the news christening it Comet Atlas. Online, however, in the digital cathedrals where belief and speculation intertwine, it was given another name, a name charged with millennia of apocalyptic weight. They called it the Destroyer. They called it the Blue Star Kachina. They called it Wormwood. For them, this was not just a comet. It was the fulfillment of a prophecy, the prophesied second sun whose arrival would herald a great and terrible transformation for humankind. The idea of a second sun is one of the most powerful and enduring archetypes in the human story. It resonates with a primal part of our consciousness, a deep-seated recognition that our world is fragile, suspended in a cosmos that is anything but benign. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Ra's eternal battle with the serpent Apep, a struggle that if lost would plunge the world into darkness, but they also preserved legends of a time of fire from the sky. The Babylonians, meticulous observers of the heavens, recorded the terrifying apparitions of what they called the bearded star, and linked its appearance to the fall of kings and the collapse of dynasties. In the biblical book of Revelation, we read of a great star named Wormwood falling from heaven and poisoning the waters of the earth. Far across the oceans, the Hopi people of the American Southwest have passed down the sacred knowledge of the Blue Star Kachina, a celestial sign that will appear at the end of the current age, heralding a period of immense purification. The Maya and the Aztecs, whose entire civilizations were built around the precise movements of the stars, possessed a profound fear of cosmic cycles, believing the world had been created and destroyed multiple times before, often by celestial events. These are not isolated tales. From the Norse myth of Ragnarök to the Hindu concept of the Yugas, the theme repeats with uncanny similarity. A celestial object, a harbinger, appears in the sky, often described as a second malevolent sun, and its arrival signals a profound and often catastrophic shift in the world order. For centuries, these were simply stories, the raw material of mythology and religion. They were humanity's attempt to find meaning in a chaotic universe, to explain the inexplicable, and to cope with the terror of their own vulnerability. Modern science offered a different, more sober explanation. The sky was not a theatre of divine drama. It was a realm of physics. Those ancient apparitions were comets, asteroids, supernovae, natural phenomena stripped of their supernatural menace. The second sun was a metaphor, a poetic device, a ghost story told around a planetary campfire. Or was it the arrival of Comet Atlas challenged that comfortable dismissal? Here was a real object, an interloper from the Oort cloud, the vast frozen reservoir of comets at the edge of our solar system. Its orbit was hyperbolic, a graceful but ominous arc indicating it was not a permanent member of our solar family. It was a visitor, a transient on a path that would carry it around our sun just once, before flinging it back out into the interstellar void, never to return. And as it drew closer, its behavior grew ever more erratic. Its light curve, the measure of its brightness, became a source of intense debate. It wasn't just brightening, it was flaring, pulsing with unpredictable bursts of energy, as if the ancient ice at its core was violently awakening after an aeon of slumber. The predictions of its potential daytime visibility fueled a global frenzy. Suddenly, the ancient prophecies didn't seem so distant or fanciful. Here, in the 21st century, was an object that could quite literally appear as a second, albeit smaller sun in our sky. The internet became the modern scribe, the digital papyrus on which a new chapter of this ancient story was being written in real time. On forums, social media, and video platforms, a powerful narrative began to coalesce, one that stood in stark opposition to the careful, measured language of science. This was a narrative of destiny, of signs and wonders. Researchers of ancient texts, both amateur and academic, began drawing startling parallels. They pointed to the comet's path, which carried it through constellations significant in esoteric lore. They noted the timing of its appearance coinciding with a period of unprecedented global upheaval, a worldwide pandemic that had already plunged humanity into a state of anxiety and uncertainty. To millions, this was no coincidence. It was synchronicity on a cosmic scale. The comet's distinct greenish-blue hue, a result of diatomic carbon and cyanogen gas fluorescing in sunlight, was seized upon as definitive proof. It was, they declared, the blue star Kachina of the Hopi prophecy made manifest. The name itself, Atlas, was seen as a sign. In Greek mythology, Atlas was the Titan condemned to hold up the sky for eternity. Was this comet then a harbinger that the heavens themselves were about to fall? The scientific community watched this burgeoning mythology with a mixture of fascination and deep concern. For them, Comet Atlas was a captivating scientific puzzle, not a divine messenger. Its dramatic brightening was likely due to a process of fragmentation. The comet was breaking apart under the intense gravitational and thermal stress of its approach to the sun. The emerald glow was simple chemistry, the predictable interaction of solar radiation with the comet's icy carbon-rich composition. Its hyperbolic orbit was not a sign of its otherworldly origin, but a common characteristic of objects disturbed from their distant homes in the Oort cloud. Every strange behavior, every unpredictable flare, was seen not as a supernatural act, but as a precious opportunity to study the primordial building blocks of our solar system up close. Astronomers rushed to train every available telescope, both ground-based and in space, on the approaching visitor. They sought to understand its composition, its structure, and the mechanics of its eventual demise. They were engaged in a quest for knowledge using the tools of reason, observation, and the scientific method. Yet for a vast and growing segment of the global population, this explanation felt cold, sterile, and incomplete. It failed to address the deeper, more profound questions the comet's appearance seemed to ask. Why now? What does it mean? The search for meaning is a fundamental human impulse, perhaps the most powerful drive we possess. In the face of overwhelming cosmic forces, we yearn for a narrative, a sense of purpose, a belief that we are part of a story larger than ourselves. Science can tell us what times a comet is an icy conglomerate of frozen gases, rock and dust. It can explain how times it travels through space following the elegant laws of orbital mechanics. It can predict where times it will go. But science cannot and does not pretend to answer the question of time's why asterisk. And it is in that profound, unanswerable why that prophecy, myth, and belief find their fertile ground. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation not between a comet and a planet, but between two fundamentally different ways of seeing the universe. On one side, the empirical, evidence-based worldview of science, which seeks to explain the cosmos through observation and natural law. On the other, the archetypal, meaning-driven worldview of prophecy, which interprets celestial events as symbols, messages from a higher intelligence, or markers in a grand, predetermined cosmic cycle. Comet Atlas became the focal point for this ancient and ongoing conflict, a celestial battleground for the soul of the 21st century. Then, as the world watched, holding its collective breath, the prophecy took another unexpected turn. Just as Comet Atlas was predicted to reach its peak brilliance, it began to fail. The celestial messenger, the harbinger of doom, faltered on its journey. In early April of 2020, amateur and professional astronomers alike began to notice a change. The comet's central core, its brilliant star-like nucleus, was no longer sharp and defined. It had become elongated, fuzzy, and significantly dimmer. The dramatic rise in brightness had not just stopped, it had reversed. The Hubble Space Telescope was aimed at the fading object, and the images it returned were both spectacular and definitive. Comet Atlas was dying. It had not just fractured, it had disintegrated into a ghostly chain of smaller icy fragments, a funeral procession of cosmic debris slowly dispersing into a faint ethereal cloud. The would-be second sun had fizzled out, becoming not a blaze of glory in our daytime sky, but a celestial phantom that faded back into the blackness from which it came. For the scientific community, this was a spectacular, if somewhat disappointing, conclusion. The comet's demise was a textbook example of tidal disruption. It was simply too fragile to survive its perilous journey. Its volatile ices, once activated by the sun's warmth, had likely sublimated with explosive force, tearing the delicate nucleus apart from within. The show was over, but the data collected was invaluable, a treasure trove of information about the life and death of these enigmatic visitors. It was a beautiful natural process, a testament to the powerful and impersonal forces that shape our solar system. But for those who had seen Atlas as the fulfillment of prophecy, the story was far from over. The comet's disintegration was not an ending. It was a plot twist, a new chapter in the mystery. The interpretation simply shifted. The destroyer had not been destroyed. It had been veiled, its true nature hidden from the unworthy. Some claimed it was a warning that had been mercifully averted. Others argued that the disintegration itself was the prophesied event, a symbolic shattering of the old world order. A more complex theory emerged that Atlas was merely a harbinger, a scout sent to announce the coming of a much larger, more significant object, still hidden in the darkness of deep space. The failure of the comet to live up to its initial hype did not extinguish the belief. It merely transformed it. This is the enduring power of prophecy. Unlike a scientific hypothesis, a prophecy is not falsifiable. It is fluid, symbolic, and endlessly adaptable. When reality fails to conform to the prediction, it is not the prophecy that is wrong, but our interpretation. The narrative simply reshapes itself to accommodate the new facts, absorbing them into its ever-expanding mythology. The story of Comet Atlas, therefore, did not end with its physical dissolution. Instead, it became a powerful case study in how ancient beliefs can not only survive, but thrive in our hyper-modern technological world. It revealed a deep schism in our global consciousness, a fundamental tension between our desire for empirical truth and our unquenchable thirst for transcendent meaning. It forces us to ask a difficult and uncomfortable question: what happens when a scientific event of immense interest is also a prophetic event of immense power? What is the truth when the sky shows us one thing and our oldest stories tell us another? We stand at a unique crossroads in human history. We have the scientific tools to strip away the veil of superstition and see the universe for what it is, a place of breathtaking scale and complexity governed by physical laws. Yet we are still the same creatures who once huddled around fires, staring up at the celestial darkness in awe and terror, telling stories to make sense of it all. The ghost of that ancient human still lives within us, and sometimes a visitor from the void like Comet Atlas calls it out. Our journey is to navigate this treacherous, fascinating intersection between the cosmos as it is and the cosmos as we need it to be. To follow the trail of this second sun prophecy, we must travel back in time to the very dawn of civilization and examine the celestial events that may have seared this myth into our collective DNA. We must venture to the far reaches of our own solar system to understand the true nature of these cosmic icebergs. And we must confront the very human heart of the matter, exploring why, even in an age of science, we can't help but look up at a comet and wonder if it has come for us. The story of Atlas may be over, but the questions it raised are more urgent than ever. The ancient prophecies remain patient and silent, waiting for the next sign to appear in the heavens. What if the most persistent ghost story in human history isn't about a haunted house but a haunted sky? What if the phantom that stalks our collective memory is not a spectre of the dead but an apparition of a star that was never there? For thousands of years, woven deep within the cultural DNA of civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, lies a strange and recurring whisper, a premonition. It is the prophecy of a second sun. A celestial twin to our own life-giving star, but one that arrives not as a companion but as a harbinger, a sign of cataclysmic change, of divine judgment, or of a profound world-altering transformation. This is not a single story, but 1,000 different stories converging on a single terrifying and awe-inspiring image, an impossible visitor blazing in our heavens. It is a cosmic echo that has refused to fade, a gravitational pull on the human psyche that we have never managed to escape. To understand its power, we must journey back, not into the darkness of space, but into the deep, star-strewn darkness of our own past. Our journey begins in a land sculpted by a single star and a single river, ancient Egypt. Here, the sun god Ra was the undisputed sovereign of existence, his daily journey across the sky an eternal promise of order over chaos, of life over death. His light was the source of all creation, the sacred fire that warmed the black soil of the Nile and sustained an empire for 3,000 years. But the Egyptian mind was one of duality. For every force of creation there existed an equal and opposite force of destruction. And for the benevolent Ra, this annihilating shadow was his own daughter Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and war. The myths tell of a time when humanity grew arrogant and plotted against their creator. Enraged, Ra plucked the very essence of his fiery being from his brow, the Uraeus, the divine cobra, and sent it to earth as a vengeful entity. This entity, the Eye of Ra, took the form of Sekhmet and descended upon the mortal world in a bloodthirsty rampage, a massacre so complete it threatened to extinguish the human race entirely. In the searing desert heat, you can almost feel the terror of that myth. Imagine it looking up at your familiar life-sustaining sun and seeing next to it a second furious celestial eye, a crimson orb of pure divine wrath, a star of vengeance sent to burn your world clean. It was a second sun, not of light, but of slaughter. This wasn't merely a cautionary tale. It was a core tenet of their cosmology, a constant reminder that the same celestial power that grants life could in an instant become an instrument of utter annihilation. The priests performed intricate rituals of appeasement not to a distant god, but to a tangible cosmic threat they believed could manifest at any moment. The fear of that second sun was a technology of social control, a psychological anchor that held their civilization in a state of perpetual reverence and dread, forever gazing upward, watching for the celestial harbinger. Across the vastness of the Atlantic, on a continent yet unknown to the pharaohs, other eyes were tracing the celestial pathways with an even greater precision. The civilizations of Mesoamerica, particularly the Maya, were not just casual stargazers. They were master mathematicians of cosmic time. Their universe was not a static creation, but a series of immense interlocking cycles, like a set of celestial gears grinding on a scale almost beyond human comprehension. For them, history was cyclical, a grand cosmic drama of worlds born and worlds destroyed. Their magnificent stone observatories at Chichen Itza and Palenque were not built merely for agricultural planning. They were instruments designed to listen to the rhythms of the cosmos, to decipher the will of the gods written in the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. Their famously intricate long-count calendar wasn't just a method of tracking days, but a prophetic engine. Each great cycle spanning over 5,000 years was a world age, and its conclusion was a moment of profound spiritual anxiety and potential upheaval. While they didn't speak of a literal second sun in the Egyptian sense, their codices are filled with references to celestial omens, heralding the end of an era, comets, eclipses, and the particularly potent movements of Venus, the brilliant morning and evening star, which to the uninitiated eye can appear like a secondary sun at dawn or dusk. They believed that Kukulkan, their feathered serpent deity, would return from the heavens at the close of a cycle, a divine being intrinsically linked to this brilliant celestial wanderer. The arrival of this harbinger was not necessarily an end, but a violent purifying transition, a cosmic reset button. Further north, in the arid mesas of what is now the American Southwest, the Hopi people keep alive an oral tradition of breathtaking scope, a prophecy that speaks directly to our modern age. Their cosmology describes a series of worlds or ages, much like the Maya, each destroyed when humanity strayed from the path of righteousness and fell into spiritual decay. They await the end of this, the fourth world, an event that will be preceded by a series of signs. The final sign, the ultimate harbinger of the Great Purification, is the appearance of the blue star Kachina. The Kachinas are spirit beings, intermediaries between the mortal and the divine, and their celestial herald is prophesied to dance in the plaza and remove its mask. When the blue star appears in the heavens, the day of purification will be at hand. For generations, this has been interpreted as a celestial event, a new star, a light in the sky that will signal the moment of profound, earth-shattering change. It is a story of hope and terror intertwined. For the righteous, it is the promise of a new, balanced world. For the corrupt, it is a final, inescapable warning. From the Nile Valley to the canyons of Arizona, the narrative is the same. The sky is not a passive backdrop. It is a stage. And when a new, unexpected actor appears upon it, the final act of the human drama is about to begin. This powerful archetype is not confined to the indigenous traditions of the world. It echoes with chilling familiarity through the heart of Western and Eastern religious thought. In the Christian New Testament, a celestial visitor, the Star of Bethlehem, serves as a divine guide, a harbinger of birth and salvation leading the Magi to the Nativity. It is a benevolent second star, a light of profound hope, but this gentle image has a terrifying twin lurking in the Scripture's final apocalyptic chapter. The book of Revelation speaks of a great star falling from heaven, its name in Greek a prophecy of its own effect, absinthos or wormwood. This star does not guide, it destroys. It falls into the rivers and springs, poisoning a third of the earth's waters, bringing bitterness and death to humanity. The duality is inescapable. The celestial messenger can be a savior, or it can be an executioner. The star that brings the king is mirrored by the star that brings the apocalypse. Even in the vast cyclical cosmologies of Hinduism, the concept of a yuga or world age is central. At the end of the current age of darkness, the Kali Yuga, the final incarnation of the god Vishnu, is prophesied to arrive as Kalki, a messianic figure appearing on a white horse wielding a blazing sword like a comet to purge the world of the wicked and usher in a new golden age. Again and again the pattern repeats, a cosmic event, a divine intervention, a world forever changed. Why? What is the engine behind this universal transmillennial obsession? The answer lies not in the sky but within ourselves. The human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. We are biologically programmed to find meaning, to connect dots, to impose a narrative onto the seeming chaos of existence. This cognitive trait, known as apophenia, was essential for our survival, helping our ancestors predict the movement of herds or the change of seasons. But when we turn this pattern-seeking gaze upon the ultimate canvas, the vast, silent, and often terrifying cosmos, we project our deepest anxieties and most profound hopes onto its tapestry of light. The heavens become a cosmic Rorschach test for the human soul. An unexpected comet is not merely a ball of ice and rock, it becomes the fiery sword of a god. A supernova, the death of a distant star, is not just a spectacular astrophysical event, it is a divine warning, the lighting of a celestial funeral pyre. The concept of a second sun is the ultimate projection of our internal duality. We live by the grace of our sun, yet we understand that cosmic forces hold the power of our extinction. The second sun embodies that terrifying paradox. It is the fear of randomness given a face. It is the desperate hope that our existence is not an accident, that there is a grander story, a divine script, and that its most dramatic moments will be announced for all to see, written in fire across the sky. It is a prophecy that creates its own gravity, pulling generations of believers into its orbit. For millennia, this potent blend of myth, psychology, and hope remained in the realm of prophecy, a waiting game played out over countless generations. Then, on a cold night in late 2019, something changed. The game was about to get a new player, one that was not born from myth or scripture, but from the cold, hard reality of physics. At observatories perched on the volcanic slopes of Hawaii, a network of robotic telescopes was performing its nightly silent vigil. This is the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, a sentinel built not to interpret prophecy, but to prevent catastrophe. Its purpose is purely scientific, to scan the heavens for any near-Earth object, any asteroid or comet that might pose a threat to our world. It is a system devoid of mysticism, operating on algorithms and tracking orbital mechanics with dispassionate precision. On December 28th, the system flagged a new object. To the automated software, it was just another faint, fuzzy smudge of light moving against the fixed background of distant stars, one of dozens discovered each week. It was assigned a suitably robotic and unpoetic designation C, 2019Y4, a new comet. In the astronomical community, there was a flicker of professional interest. Another small icy body from the outer solar system was making its long journey toward the sun. But as the first few weeks of 2020 unfolded and telescopes all over the world turned to track the newcomer, that flicker of interest began to grow into a palpable buzz of excitement. This comet was different. Its behavior was extraordinary, even alarming. Comets, as they approach the sun, are warmed by its radiation, causing their ice to sublave, to turn directly from a solid into a gas. This process creates the characteristic coma, the glowing atmosphere around the nucleus, and the magnificent tail that can stretch for millions of miles. The brightness of a comet is notoriously difficult to predict, but C, 2019Y4 was defying all the models. It was brightening at an exponential, almost unheard of rate. With each passing week, it grew dramatically more luminous, its light output increasing by factors of hundreds, then thousands. Astronomers began making calculations that seemed at first to be flights of fancy. They plotted its trajectory, a long parabolic arc that would bring it swooping incredibly close to the sun in late May. If this frantic brightening continued, the comet would not just be an interesting target for backyard telescopes. Projections suggested it could become a truly historic celestial event. It might become bright enough to be seen with the naked eye from city suburbs, an ethereal ghost hanging in the twilight sky. Some of the more optimistic predictions were staggering. They suggested C, 2019Y4 could rival the planet Venus in brilliance, potentially becoming a daylight comet, an object so luminous it could pierce the blue veil of our daytime sky. A new light visible in the heavens while our own sun burned beside it. Without realizing it, science had just provided the raw material for prophecy. A script written in the language of orbital mechanics and sublimation rates was about to be presented to a world that had been rehearsing its lines for thousands of years. The ancient sleeping fear of a celestial harbinger was about to be awakened by the cold, impartial light of a real and approaching object. The stage was set for a collision far more profound than any physical impact, a collision between ancient myth and modern astronomy, between faith and physics. A small, icy visitor from the depths of space was on its way, and it was about to become the most powerful Rorschach test humanity had ever faced. To understand the firestorm of speculation that surrounded 3I, Atlas, to truly grasp why this particular celestial wanderer ignited our collective imagination, we must first journey back to the very dawn of our solar system. we must venture to a place of profound cold and darkness, a realm so distant that our sun is but the brightest star in a sea of countless others. Here in the unimaginable emptiness of interstellar space lies the ancestral home of comets, the Oort cloud. It is not a cloud of water vapor, but a vast spherical shell of trillions of frozen relics, the leftover building materials from when the planets themselves were formed 4.5 billion years ago. Think of it as our solar system's cosmic attic, a dark and forgotten nursery where primordial ghosts sleep for eternity. These are not mere rocks, they are time capsules. Within their icy hearts, they hold the original chemistry of our cosmic neighborhood: water, ammonia, methane, and the complex carbon molecules that are the very building blocks of life. They are frozen whispers from the beginning of time. For eons, they drift in a silent gravitational ballet held in a delicate balance by our sun's feeble, distant pull. But the galaxy is not a quiet place. The gravitational tide of the Milky Way itself can stir this tranquil reservoir, or the close passage of another star, a cosmic intruder, can send a subtle but irresistible ripple through the cloud. All it takes is the gentlest of nudges, a gravitational caress, to dislodge one of these sleeping giants from its ancient orbit. And with that, a journey begins. A journey of millions of years falling silently and visibly from the cold abyss toward the distant beckoning light of the sun. For almost the entirety of this immense fall, the comet remains a dormant, dark nucleus of ice and rock, utterly invisible to us. It is a ghost ship sailing a black ocean. But as it crosses the orbit of Jupiter and then Mars, a profound transformation begins. The sun, once a distant pinpoint of light, now grows into a powerful engine of change, a celestial blowtorch aimed directly at this primordial snowball. The frozen surface, which has known nothing but absolute zero for billions of years, begins to feel this alien warmth. But in the vacuum of space, ice doesn't melt into water. It sublimates. It erupts, turning directly from a solid into a gas, venting enormous plumes of vapor and dust into the void. This process, this violent awakening, creates a vast, luminous atmosphere around the tiny nucleus. We call it the coma. And while the solid heart of a comet is typically only a few miles across the size of a small city, its coma can swell to astonishing proportions, an ethereal sphere of glowing gas and dust that can become larger than the planet Jupiter. It is this magnificent temporary atmosphere, reflecting the light of the sun, that allows us to see the comet from Earth. The ghost finally materializes. As it plunges deeper into the solar system, the sun's influence becomes even more dramatic. A relentless stream of charged particles, the solar wind, blows past the comet at 1,000,000 miles an hour. This wind is an invisible force, but it sculpts the comet's newly formed atmosphere with artistic violence, pushing the gases straight back away from the sun. This creates the first of the comet's two glorious tails, the ion tail. Composed of electrically charged gas molecules, it glows with a haunting ethereal blue light of its own, like a cosmic fluorescent tube. It is a celestial windsock, always pointing directly away from the sun, a perfect compass needle in the interplanetary medium. At the same time, the larger particles of dust released from the nucleus are not so easily pushed by the solar wind. They are heavier, more sluggish. They are left behind in the comet's orbital path, forming a second, broader, and often gracefully curved tail. This dust tail doesn't glow on its own. It simply shines by reflecting sunlight, appearing as a brilliant, creamy white plume, stretching for millions of miles across the sky. It is the comet's breadcrumb trail, a shimmering record of its path through our corner of space. A single comet then becomes a breathtaking spectacle of physics. A tiny dark nucleus giving birth to a glowing coma, larger than a planet, which in turn sprouts two distinct, magnificent tails, one painted by the solar wind, the other tracing its orbital history. It is a performance orchestrated by gravity and light, a transient masterpiece sculpted from the oldest materials we know. And in late 2019, we detected a new performer heading for center stage. It wasn't discovered by a lone astronomer peering through a brass telescope on a lonely mountaintop, a romantic image from a bygone era. This visitor was flagged by a modern tireless sentinel, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS. A pair of robotic telescopes in Hawaii scanning the entire visible sky every few nights, their primary mission is to find asteroids on a collision course with Earth. But in their ceaseless vigil, they also find other things. And on December 28, 2019, the system's algorithms flagged a faint, fuzzy smudge moving against the background of distant stars. It was given the designation C, 2019Y4, but it would soon become known to the world by the name of its discoverer, Atlas. At first, it was just another faint comet, one of dozens found every year of interest only to a small community of professional and amateur astronomers. But as the weeks went by and more observations were gathered, a startling picture began to emerge. When astronomers plotted its trajectory, they realized this was no short-term visitor like Halley's Comet returning every 76 years. The shape of its orbit was profoundly elongated, a vast parabolic arc that stretched deep into the unknown. They calculated its orbital period to be over 5,000 years. This meant 3I, Atlas, was a long-period comet, a true stranger from the Oort cloud. It was a fresh one, a pristine time capsule that had likely never passed through the inner solar system before. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Comets that make repeated trips around the Sun are like cosmic batteries that slowly lose their charge. Each pass boils away their most volatile ices, leaving them dimmer and less active. But a fresh comet like Atlas arrives fully charged, packed with the highly volatile primordial ices that create the most spectacular displays. It was a cosmic wildcard, and it was starting to brighten. Not just brighten, but brighten at an astonishing, almost unprecedented rate. Astronomers measure the brightness of celestial objects on a magnitude scale, where lower numbers mean brighter objects. A faint star visible to the naked eye is around magnitude 6. The brightest star in the night sky, Sirius, is negative 1.5. Venus, the brilliant evening and morning star, can reach a dazzling negative 4.7. In early 2020, Comet Atlas was still a faint telescopic object, but its light curve, a graph of its brightness over time, was shooting upwards at a shockingly steep angle. It was outperforming all the standard models. Something incredibly energetic was happening on its surface. As astronomers extrapolated that curve forward, projecting its brightness as it raced toward its closest approach to the Sun, or perihelion, in late May, the numbers they were seeing were simply staggering. The initial conservative estimates suggested it would easily become a naked eye object. Then the models began to predict it could reach magnitude 0, rivaling the brightest stars in the sky. As more data poured in, the predictions became even more audacious. Some models, based on its frantic rate of brightening, suggested it could peak at magnitude negative 5 or even negative 10. These were numbers that forced even the most seasoned astronomers to catch their breath. To outshine Venus would be a generational spectacle, but to reach magnitude negative 10, that was an order of magnitude brighter still. An object that brilliant would not only dominate the night sky, it would be visible in broad daylight, a second ghostly point of light hanging in the blue expanse next to our own Sun. The scientific community was electric with anticipation. This was the stuff of legend, the great comet of 1811, which hung in the sky for months. Comet Hale-Bopp, in 1997, a majestic sight that captivated the world. But Atlas had the potential to surpass them all. It was on track to be, without hyperbole, the celestial event of a lifetime. A message began to ripple through observatories and university astronomy departments across the globe. Get ready. Point every instrument you have at this object. This is not a drill. But as this wave of scientific excitement was building, a very different kind of conversation was beginning to stir, not in the hallowed halls of academia, but in the sprawling, interconnected digital wilderness of the internet. The same data points that excited astronomers were feeding a completely different narrative online. For millions of people, a pristine visitor from the outer darkness brightening at an exponential rate on a trajectory to potentially become visible during the day was not a matter of orbital mechanics and sublimation rates. It was a sign. The news of a potential daylight comet spread like a digital wildfire, leaping from astronomy forums to conspiracy theory websites, from YouTube channels to Facebook groups. The algorithm sensing engagement fanned the flames. The phrase "second sun" began to appear, at first a trickle, then a flood. This idea is a powerful and ancient archetype deeply embedded in human mythology. It taps into our most primal anxieties about cosmic order and divine intervention. It is the blue star Kachina of Hopi prophecy, heralding the day of purification. It is wormwood, the star falling from heaven in the book of Revelation, turning the waters bitter. In the modern era, it has been co-opted by theories of Planet X or Nibiru, a mythical rogue planet whose return is said to bring cataclysmic pole shifts and destruction. Comet Atlas, with its predicted extraordinary brightness, was now being cast as the lead actor in this ancient recurring drama. It was no longer just a comet, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy. The comet's very name, Atlas, was seized upon as deeply symbolic. In Greek mythology, Atlas was the Titan condemned to hold up the heavens for eternity. For those inclined to see omens, the meaning was obvious. A celestial object named for the being, who carries the weight of the sky, was arriving to signal that the sky was about to fall. Online, two parallel worlds were tracking the comet's every move. In one, you would see complex orbital diagrams, light curve charts, and spectroscopic analyses of the comet's chemical composition. It was a world of disciplined observation, of mathematical prediction, of profound curiosity about the natural universe. Here, the potential for a second sun was a literal scientific prospect, an object so bright it could be seen when the actual sun was up. In the other world, you would find screenshots of ancient texts, numerological breakdowns of the comet's designation, and frantic discussions connecting its trajectory to geopolitical events. Here, the second sun was a metaphor for a divine replacement, a harbinger of apocalypse, a final warning to humanity. The tension between these two interpretations became palpable. Every new press release from an observatory confirming the comet's continued brightening was immediately absorbed into the prophetic narrative, cited as yet more proof that the official story was hiding a deeper, more terrifying truth. Scientists speaking with cautious optimism about a beautiful natural phenomenon found their words twisted and reframed as evidence of an impending doomsday. They were looking at the same point of light in the sky, but they were seeing two fundamentally different realities. One group saw a dazzling messenger from the past, an object promising to teach us about the birth of our own world, a rare gift of cosmic chemistry. The other saw a terrifying messenger from the future, an object promising to bring about the end of our world, a final divine judgment. As March turned to April of 2020, the comet continued its relentless plunge toward the sun, and the chasm between these two perceptions grew ever wider. The world, already unsettled and on edge, turned its gaze upward, holding its collective breath. Every telescope on Earth, professional and amateur alike, was now fixed upon this celestial messenger, this ghost from the dawn of time that held the promise of a lifetime. But the message it was about to deliver as it approached the moment of its greatest trial was something no one, not the scientists, with their precise charts, not the prophets with their ancient texts, could have ever predicted. It was the apotheosis of a global obsession, the final breathless climb towards a celestial coronation. Across the planet we held our collective breath, united not by a screen or a stadium, but by a shared sky. The Visitor 3I, Atlas, was no longer just a comet. It had become a vessel for our aspirations, a focal point for our anxieties, a luminous ink blot onto which an entire world projected its hopes. It was hurtling inward, a cosmic slingshot powered by the sun's own gravity, and every calculation, every model predicted a spectacle for the ages. The prophetic narrative you saw taking root had now bloomed into a formidable cultural force, its tendrils reaching into every corner of modern life, intertwining with ancient myths and futuristic dreams. It was a story too perfect to resist a wanderer from the unknown, arriving at a time of deep uncertainty, promising to bloom into a second sun, a beacon of transformation. This was the zenith. The final days before perihelion were meant to be a crescendo of light, a gathering of brilliance that would rival the brightest stars. Yet, in the hushed, sterile environments of our observatories, a different story was beginning to be told. It did not arrive with a thunderclap or a dramatic explosion, but with the quietest of whispers, a single discordant note in a symphony that had until now been perfectly harmonious. The first hint of trouble came from an automated observatory high in the Chilean Andes, a robotic eye tasked with a relentless photometric vigil. Its job was simple: to measure the precise amount of light being reflected by the comet, charting its brightening curve with inhuman precision. For weeks, that curve had been a perfect ascending arc, a testament to the comet's steady approach and vibrant activity. Then, on a Tuesday, the curve flattened. It was a deviation so minuscule it was initially dismissed as atmospheric interference, a momentary shimmer in the air, a ghost in the machine. An algorithm flagged the data point as an outlier, a statistical hiccup to be smoothed over in the morning. But the next night, it didn't correct itself. The curve didn't just flatten, it dipped, an almost imperceptible decline, a fractional percentage point. Yet in the context of a comet that should have been erupting with ever-increasing ferocity, it was a profound and unnerving anomaly. An email flagged with low priority was sent from the observatory's automated system to a small group of astronomers. Subject: photometric irregularity in 3I, Atlas. Most who saw it that morning archived it without a second thought, their minds already occupied by the impending celestial glory. But a few, the ones whose careers were built on noticing the almost unnoticeable, paused. A deep-seated instinct, honed over decades of staring into the silent darkness, began to stir. It was like a doctor detecting a faint arrhythmia in the heart of a marathon runner, just moments before the finish line. It made no sense. Simultaneously, halfway across the world, a team in Hawaii using the powerful Keck Observatory was performing high-resolution imaging, attempting to resolve the comet's nucleus, that tiny solid heart hidden within its vast, glowing coma. Their images were meant to be celebratory, the last clear portraits of the icy core, before it became lost in the blinding glare of its own magnificent outburst. What they saw instead stopped them cold. The nucleus, which had always appeared as a single star-like point of light, even in their best images, looked wrong. It was fuzzy, elongated, misshapen, as if a divine painter had dragged a careless thumb across the wet canvas of space. Again, the first assumption was error. Perhaps it was a tracking problem with the telescope mount, or a subtle flaw in the adaptive optics system that flexes the telescope's mirror to cancel out atmospheric distortion. They ran diagnostics. They recalibrated the instruments. They took the images again. The elongation remained. It was real. The quiet, low-priority email from Chile was suddenly followed by a frantic flurry of encrypted messages and urgent video calls from Hawaii. The two disparate pieces of data, a slight dimming and a strange elongation, were not separate anomalies. They were two different symptoms of the same unthinkable diagnosis. The heart of 3I, Atlas, was failing. Within hours, the astronomical community was ablaze. The news spread not through press releases but through the guarded, rapid-fire channels of scientific collaboration. Schedules were scrambled, pre-planned observation runs on the world's most powerful telescopes were unceremoniously dumped. A request carrying the highest possible priority was shot to the operators of the Hubble Space Telescope. Its mission to turn its legendary unwavering eye towards the comet, to rise above the blurring veil of Earth's atmosphere and deliver the final irrefutable verdict. We were no longer just watching a comet. We were performing emergency exploratory surgery at a distance of millions of miles. The world outside, blissfully unaware, continued its countdown to revelation, sharing digitally enhanced photos and quoting prophetic passages. Inside the scientific sanctums, however, the mood had shifted from eager anticipation to a kind of horrified, adrenaline-fueled fascination. The first images from Hubble came down, and they were breathtakingly, tragically clear. There was no longer one nucleus. There were two, and then, in the next set of images taken just a day later, there were three, then four, lined up like a string of ghost pearls against the black velvet of space. 3I, Atlas, the great celestial hope, the harbinger of a new dawn, was disintegrating. It wasn't just cracking, it was shattering. The solid, city-sized block of ancient ice and rock that had journeyed for millennia from the cold, dark frontiers of the solar system had finally succumbed to the gravitational stresses and the thermal shock of its solar encounter. The sun, the very star that was supposed to elevate it to glory, had instead become its executioner. The heat was not just sublimating its surface ice into a glorious tail, it was penetrating deep into primordial fractures and fissures within its core. Trapped gases frozen for eons were expanding with explosive force, prying the comet apart from the inside out. The elongation seen from Hawaii was the first moment of the fracture, the nucleus stretching and breaking like a piece of rock candy. The dimming seen from Chile was the immediate consequence. A fracturing core exposes vast new surfaces of fresh, dark ice to the vacuum of space. For a brief, deceptive moment, this can cause a surge in brightness as these new surfaces erupt. But the structural integrity is gone. The comet's ability to release gas and dust in a concentrated, coherent way is compromised. Instead of a single powerful jet, it becomes a collection of smaller, less efficient fragments, each with its own tiny, fading coma. The overall brightness, the sum of all its parts, begins a steady and irreversible decline. The great second sun was not igniting. It was being snuffed out. The scientific world was now in a state of controlled chaos, a frantic race to capture every last photon from the dying embers. This was no longer about witnessing a spectacle. It was about performing a cosmic autopsy in real time. Spectrographs were trained on the individual fragments, analyzing the unique chemical fingerprints of the pristine, newly exposed ices from the comet's interior. These were materials that had been locked away since the birth of the solar system, now laid bare for our inspection. Radar astronomers bounced powerful signals off the debris cloud, trying to map the size and velocity of the pieces to understand the geometry of the breakup. Was it a gentle, crumbling decay or a violent, explosive rupture? Every piece of data was a clue in solving the mystery of its demise. And as the evidence poured in the collision between this unfolding scientific reality and the deeply entrenched public prophecy became unavoidable and brutal. The change was at first too subtle for the backyard stargazer to notice, but within a week, even the most casual observer could see it. The comet was fading. The brilliant star-like object that had dominated the pre-dawn sky was visibly dimmer, its once sharp head now appearing diffuse and weak. The promised crescendo had been replaced by a slow, agonizing diminuendo. Confusion rippled through the global consciousness. Online forums that had buzzed with excitement and certainty fell into a bewildered silence punctuated by questions filled with doubt. News channels, which had been running breathless countdown clocks to perihelion, quietly replaced them with segments on unexpected developments. The proponents of the second sun prophecy were faced with a crisis of faith. Their narrative was built on a foundation of escalating brilliance, a promise of light and more light. How could they explain this retreat, this fading? Some tried reinterpreting the fragmentation as a part of the prophecy that had been misunderstood. Perhaps the second sun was not one light but many a holy scattering of divine sparks. Perhaps this was a test, a shedding of the physical form to release a spiritual essence. But for the vast majority, the visual evidence was simply too powerful, too contradictory. You cannot hail the arrival of a sun when the object in the sky is actively disappearing before your very eyes. The spell was broken. The beautiful, captivating story that had held the world in its thrall was dissolving, fragmenting, just like the celestial body that inspired it. And in its place, a different kind of awe began to emerge. It was a more sober, more profound sense of wonder. We were not witnessing a birth as the prophecy had claimed. We were witnessing a death. We were watching with unprecedented clarity the final fleeting moments of an object that was billions of years old. The train of fragments, each trailing its own ghostly wisp of dust and gas, became a kind of celestial funeral procession. It was beautiful, but it was the haunting, ephemeral beauty of decay, of impermanence. The bright, singular point of hope had transformed into a scattered, silent reminder of cosmic fragility. It told a story not of divine intervention, but of the unforgiving and impersonal laws of physics, of pressure and temperature, and the inexorable pull of gravity. The death of 3I Atlas became a more powerful teacher than its life ever could have been. It forced a global reckoning, a moment where a comforting myth evaporated in the face of a stark, observable truth. The great pivot had occurred. The conversation was no longer about what was to come, but about what had just been lost. The world turned away from the prophets and back towards the scientists, no longer asking, "What does it mean?" but a far more fundamental question, a question that now echoed from the great observatories to the quiet homes of amateur skywatchers everywhere. The comet was gone, the second sun a phantom, and all that remained was the new central mystery, the one that would drive the next phase of our investigation. Why? Why did this particular comet, one that seemed so robust, so vibrant, so full of promise, meet such a spectacular and catastrophic end? What hidden flaw did it carry with it from the darkness? And so the celestial titan stumbled, the singular brilliant point of light that had captivated a planet, the object upon which so many hopes and fears were pinned, began to unravel. It did not explode in a final glorious cataclysm as some might have imagined. There was no thunderclap across the void. Instead, it was a quiet, almost graceful dissolution, a surrender to the fundamental forces that govern this cosmic ocean. The immense gravitational pull of the sun, the very star it was supposed to challenge, acted like an invisible tide, tugging and stretching the comet's fragile core. Simultaneously, the sun's relentless heat, a celestial blowtorch intensifying with every passing million miles, was vaporizing the ices that held its ancient dusty heart together. The pressure from within, a fierce outgassing of primordial volatiles, became too much for the weakened structure to bear. It was a battle fought on a microscopic granular level, yet the consequences were cosmically vast. The nucleus, a loose agglomeration of ice and rock no more coherent than a frozen snowball, simply gave way. The spectacle we had been promised was not one of birth, but of disintegration. What had been a solitary beacon on a lonely path became a ghostly procession. Through the unblinking eyes of the Hubble Space Telescope and a global network of observatories, we witnessed the aftermath in exquisite, heartbreaking detail. The comet's core, its very essence, had fractured into a string of smaller, fainter pieces. It resembled a diamond shattered on the anvil of gravity, each shard catching the sunlight for a brief moment before beginning its own solitary fading journey. Astronomers watched their initial exhilaration at witnessing a rare fragmentation event tinged with a palpable sense of anticlimax. They were scientists, and this was an unprecedented opportunity to study the death throes of a comet, to analyze the composition of its interior now laid bare to the cosmos. They could trace the orbits of the individual fragments, learning more about the delicate gravitational dance that choreographs our solar system. This was data pure and invaluable, yet even within the sterile confines of the control room, a human sigh could be heard. They too had looked up with a sense of wonder, hoping to share a once-in-a-generation event with the world. The scientific prize was significant, but the shared spectacle, the universal moment of awe, had just been extinguished. This disillusionment rippled outwards, first hitting the dedicated community of amateur astronomers. For every professional observatory that trained its multi-million-dollar mirror on the unfolding drama, there were 10,000 backyards where you felt the loss on a much more personal level. These were the sentinels of the night, the patient watchers who had spent countless cold hours tracking 3I, Atlas, from its first faint appearance. They had meticulously plotted its brightening curve on homemade charts, their excitement building in a direct, tangible relationship with every tenth of a magnitude it gained. They had invested not just their time, but their passion, cleaning lenses, calibrating mounts, and sharing their breathless observations in sprawling online forums that had become virtual town squares for the celestial event. It was a community bound by a shared democratic love for the sky. For them, the comet wasn't just a data point. It was a companion on a grand journey. Then the messages in those forums began to change. The triumphant posts of "Got it brighter than ever tonight" were replaced by questions laced with concern. Is it just me, or does it look fuzzy, diffuse? Then came the confirmation from others, the collective dawning realization that the light was not only failing to grow, it was actively diminishing. The sharp stellar point they had been tracking was bloating into a faint, elongated smudge. The brightness curve, which had soared upwards like a rocket, suddenly plummeted. It was a visual representation of a dream dying. The decline was swift, brutal, and undeniable. Within a week, the comet had faded beyond the reach of binoculars. Within 2, it was a challenge even for moderately sized telescopes. The celestial celebrity had become a ghost, a whisper of what it was meant to be. For these dedicated skygazers, the silence in the forums was as profound as the silence in the sky where a second sun was supposed to be born. The shared project, the collective excitement evaporated into a quiet, lingering disappointment. The great celestial show was over before the main act had even begun. This sense of cosmic letdown soon saturated the public consciousness, amplified and then swiftly abandoned by the very media that had fanned the flames of expectation. The sensationalist headlines, which had screamed of "a new star in our sky" and the prophecy comet, vanished from the digital landscape. They were replaced by a wave of more sober, almost apologetic articles. The language shifted dramatically from awe to analysis, from prophecy to physics. News outlets, once eager to feature mystics and prophecy adherents, alongside astronomers, now exclusively quoted scientists, explaining the mundane fragility of cometary nuclei. The narrative of a profound celestial omen was surgically excised, replaced by a lesson in orbital mechanics and material science. The second sun became the great cosmic fizzle, a cautionary tale about hype and the unpredictable nature of these icy visitors. The global conversation, once buzzing with anticipation, turned to a collective, slightly embarrassed shrug. And with that shrug came the inevitable tide of skepticism and mockery. For every person who had looked up with genuine hope, there were 5 who had been waiting for the chance to say "I told you so." Social media, the engine of the initial hype, became the arena for its ridicule. Memes proliferated, depicting 3i Atlas as a tiny birthday candle next to a blazing sun, or as a stage performer tripping on its way to the spotlight. The term "second sun" became a punchline, a shorthand for any overblown prediction that fails to materialize. It was filed away in the public mind alongside other failed doomsday prophecies and grand predictions from Y2K to the 2012 Mayan apocalypse. The brief shining moment where it seemed the entire world was united in looking up at the same object, holding a collective breath, was now remembered with a cynical smirk. The retreat from belief was as swift and total as the comet's own fading light. The mainstream discourse, having milked the story for every drop of speculative drama, now treated it as a foolish, forgettable fad. The world, it seemed, had moved on, but for those who had truly believed, moving on was not an option. For the adherents of the prophecy, the disintegration of 3i, Atlas, was not an end but a test. It was a challenge to the very architecture of their conviction. When reality refuses to conform to a deeply held belief, the human mind possesses a remarkable, almost alarming elasticity. It doesn't always shatter the belief. Often it remodels reality to fit. In the weeks and months that followed the comet's demise, we witnessed a fascinating psychological phenomenon: the mutation and survival of a belief system under extreme evidentiary pressure. It was a masterclass in the resilience of prophecy, demonstrating how a narrative can endure even the complete annihilation of its central proof. The followers did not abandon their faith, they adapted it. Their response unfolded in a series of distinct, overlapping phases, a defense mechanism for a creed under siege. The first and most immediate adaptation was reinterpretation. The physical event was no longer the prophecy itself, but a symbol of it. The fragmentation, they argued, was not a failure. It was a message. In online enclaves and esoteric newsletters, a new consensus began to form. The comet breaking apart, they claimed, was a powerful and explicit sign of a coming schism on Earth. It symbolized the shattering of the old world order, the fracturing of corrupt institutions, the breaking of illusions that had held humanity captive. The prophecy was never about a literal physical second star, they now insisted, but about a spiritual awakening, a dawning of a new consciousness. The comet's death was a necessary celestial sacrifice to herald this great change. In this new light, the disillusionment of the mainstream was cast as a lack of spiritual vision, an inability to comprehend the deeper metaphorical truth. They had seen a fizzle. The true believers had witnessed a portent. By transforming the event from a physical fulfillment to a symbolic omen, the prophecy was rendered immune to falsification. A fizzled comet is a scientific fact. A divine symbol is a matter of faith beyond the reach of telescopes and spectrometers. Following closely on the heels of reinterpretation was the subtle but crucial tactic of shifting the goalposts. As the memory of 3i Atlas began to fade, a new narrative thread emerged. Perhaps this comet was never the chosen one to begin with. It was instead a forerunner, a harbinger sent to prepare humanity to awaken those who were ready to listen. It was John the Baptist to the real celestial Messiah, which was still to come. This reframing was psychologically brilliant. It acknowledged the failure of the specific prediction without undermining the integrity of the overarching prophecy. All the energy, hype, and emotion invested in 3i. Atlas was not wasted. It was part of the process, a necessary trial run. This allowed believers to retain their sense of anticipation and purpose. Their watch was not over. In fact, it had just become more important. They were now the initiated, the ones who had understood the test of 3i, Atlas, and were therefore better prepared to identify the true celestial candidate when it finally arrived. The prophecy was not dead, it was merely deferred. This deferment naturally led to the third and most enduring phase of adaptation, the search for a new candidate. A belief system, like any living organism, requires energy to survive. For a prophecy cult, that energy is anticipation. With 3i Atlas gone, the vacuum it left needed to be filled, and quickly. The hunt began anew. Almost immediately, other celestial objects were nominated. A newly discovered asteroid with a peculiar orbit, a faint distant comet on a long trajectory, even whispers of a yet unseen planet X lurking in the outer solar system. Each candidate was scrutinized through the lens of the prophecy's framework. Its orbital elements were matched against numerological formulas. Its discovery date was analyzed for symbolic significance. The community of believers, far from being scattered by disappointment, was re-energized by a new quest. 3i, Atlas, became a historical footnote in their grand unfolding saga. It was a fallen hero perhaps, but the war for humanity's soul was far from over, and another champion was surely waiting in the wings of the cosmos. The prophecy had developed an immune system, one capable of identifying a factual contradiction as a foreign body, neutralizing it through reinterpretation and redirecting the system's energy toward a new, more promising host. Thus, the legacy of 3i, Atlas, became profoundly dual. In the annals of astronomy, it is recorded as a fascinating but ultimately unremarkable long-period comet, a textbook case of tidal disruption, a footnote in the history of celestial mechanics. It is a story of predictable physics, of ice and dust and gravity. But in the annals of belief, it became something far more potent. It became a myth, a martyr, a catalyst. The event demonstrated with stunning clarity that a belief does not live or die by the strength of its evidence. It survives on the strength of its narrative and the psychological needs of its followers. The ghostly scattered fragments of the comet continued on their path, invisible to all but the most powerful instruments their light extinguished. Yet the idea they represented, the prophecy of a second sun, had, like the comet itself, simply broken into smaller, more diffuse pieces. It hadn't vanished. It had merely become harder to see, retreating from the bright glare of the mainstream back into the shadows of faith, where it could regroup, evolve, and wait for the next faint light to appear in the darkness, ready to be crowned the new savior of the sky. The question was no longer about a single comet. It was about us. It was about our relentless, unyielding search for meaning in the grand, silent emptiness, and what we are willing to build in that silence when the universe refuses to speak. And so the celestial fireworks sputtered and died, the promise of a new sun, a beacon that had ignited imaginations across the globe, was extinguished not in a blaze of glory but with a silent, mournful fade. For weeks, we had watched its ascent, a tiny point of light blossoming into a spectacle of hope and cosmic portent. Then, in the blink of an astronomical eye, the light faltered. It fractured. The single brilliant messenger from the void was replaced by a ghostly smear, a funeral procession of icy phantoms drifting apart in the unforgiving dark. The great show was over, but for the scientists who had tracked its every move, the real work, the cosmic autopsy, had just begun. The question that echoed in observatories from Mauna Kea to the Atacama Desert was no longer what will it become, but a far more profound and immediate mystery: what precisely had killed Comet 3 Forced Atlas? The evidence was being gathered. In a torrent of data, a flood of photons captured by the pounding, world's most powerful eyes. The Hubble Space Telescope, swinging its gaze to the scene of the crime, delivered the first haunting images. They were not pictures of a glorious stellar object, but of a celestial catastrophe. We saw not one nucleus, but a cascade of them. Dozens of small, icy fragments, each a child of the original body, were strung out like pearls on an invisible thread of gravity. This was no simple crack. This was a complete and utter structural collapse, a disintegration so thorough it was as if the comet had simply given up its ghost. Ground-based telescopes using advanced adaptive optics to pierce the veil of our own atmosphere confirmed the diagnosis. They measured the dimming light, analysed its spectral signature, and tracked the sad, diverging paths of the debris. The verdict was unanimous. 3I, Atlas, had suffered a cataclysmic fragmentation event. The vibrant, active heart of the comet had ceased to beat. With the what established, the investigation turned to the why. The detectives in this case, astronomers and astrophysicists, began to build a profile of the prime suspects, the fundamental forces of the solar system that could commit such an act of cosmic violence. The first and most obvious culprit was the one Atlas was flying towards with such reckless abandon our own Sunday. It wasn't the heat, not yet, that was the primary suspect. The comet was still relatively far out beyond the orbit of Mars, where the sun's warmth was more of a gentle caress than a searing blowtorch. No, the weapon in question was far more subtle, invisible, and inescapable. It was gravity itself, but wielded in a specific and brutal way. We call them tidal forces, a name that conjures images of ocean waves but describes a power of universal consequence. Imagine holding a delicate, loosely packed ball of snow. If you simply push on it, it might compact, but if you could somehow grab the front and the back of that snowball simultaneously and pull in opposite directions, it would tear apart instantly. This is the essence of a tidal force. The sun's gravity doesn't pull on a comet as a single point. It pulls on every particle within it. Crucially, the pull is stronger on the side of the comet facing the sun and weaker on the side facing away. This difference, this gravitational gradient across the body of the comet, creates a relentless stretching effect. It's a cosmic torture rack, constantly trying to elongate the object to pry its constituent parts away from each other. For a dense, solid planet like Earth, this force is manageable, creating the gentle rise and fall of our oceans. But for a fragile, low-density object like a comet, a body held together by little more than frozen gases and the whisper of its own feeble gravity, this constant differential pull can be a death sentence. Scientists modeled the trajectory of 3I Atlas, calculating the immense and growing strain it was being subjected to with every passing day. As it plunged deeper into the sun's gravitational well, the tidal stress was increasing exponentially. It was like a submarine descending into the abyss with the external pressure mounting to a critical point. The comet's nucleus, perhaps only a few kilometers across, was being squeezed and stretched by a star 1,000,000 times its size. Any pre-existing fractures, any internal weaknesses in its icy structure would have been mercilessly exploited by this invisible torment. The data from the fragmented pieces seemed to support this hypothesis. The slow, gentle separation of the debris was consistent with an object being quietly and inexorably pulled apart rather than exploding violently. The sun, the very star that was supposed to make Atlas famous, was now looking like its most likely executioner. Yet a compelling case from the prosecution does not close an investigation. Other forces could have been at play, and a second, more insidious suspect soon emerged from the data. This killer wouldn't have come from the outside, but from within. The comet may not have been murdered. It might have committed an unknowing suicide. The suspect was the comet's own rotation. Nearly every object in the cosmos spins a remnant of the angular momentum from the swirling cloud of gas and dust from which it formed. Comets are no exception. They are, in effect, massive, lopsided gravitational gyroscopes tumbling through space. Normally, this spin is slow and stable, a lazy pirouette performed over hours or even days. But the journey toward the sun changes everything. As a comet warms its surface, ice doesn't melt. It sublimates, turning directly from a solid into a gas. This process creates jets, spectacular plumes of vapor and dust that erupt from the nucleus and form the iconic coma and tail. These jets are the source of a comet's beauty, but they are also engines of its potential destruction. If the nucleus were a perfect uniform sphere, these jets might fire off symmetrically, their forces balancing each other out. But a comet's nucleus is anything but perfect. It is a lumpy, irregular, potato-shaped rock of ice and dust, pockmarked with fissures and dotted with regions of more volatile material. Consequently, the jets erupt unevenly like misaligned thrusters on a spacecraft. These asymmetrical jets produce a net torque, a twisting force that can begin to alter the comet's spin. For 3I Atlas, the evidence suggested a deadly feedback loop had been initiated. As it drew nearer the sun, the sunlight grew more intense. This increased intensity led to more vigorous sublimation, which in turn created more powerful jets. These jets, firing off-center from its lumpy nucleus, began to spin the comet up faster and faster. Think of an ice skater pulling in their arms to accelerate their spin. The comet was doing the same, but with jets of its own vapor. This process, known as rotational spin-up, can push a comet nucleus toward a critical threshold. As the rotational speed increases, centrifugal force builds, trying to fling material away from the center. At first, the comet's minuscule gravity and the tensile strength of its icy structure are enough to hold it together. But if the spin continues to accelerate, a tipping point is reached. The outward centrifugal force overwhelms the inward gravitational pull. The comet quite literally tears itself apart from the inside out. Astronomers looked for clues to this suicidal spin in the behavior of the fragments. Did they fly off with a velocity that suggested they were flung from a rapidly rotating body? The analysis was complex, but some models showed that a spin period of just a few hours could have been enough to initiate the breakup of such a fragile object. It was a tantalizing possibility. The comet, in its enthusiastic response to the sun's light, had spun itself into a frenzy, a fatal dance that its own body could not withstand. The two primary suspects, external tidal forces and internal rotational stress, were not mutually exclusive. In fact, they may well have been co-conspirators in the comet's demise. The gravitational stretching from the sun could have created the initial weaknesses, the first deep cracks in the icy facade. Then, the accelerating spin could have provided the final catastrophic jolt needed to shatter the already compromised structure. It was a perfect storm of cosmic physics, a two-pronged attack that the comet had no chance of surviving. But to truly understand the victim, to comprehend why 3I Atlas was so uniquely vulnerable, we have to look beyond the immediate circumstances of its death. We have to trace its life story back to its very beginning, to its birthplace at the uttermost edge of the solar system. 3I Atlas was not a seasoned traveler. It was not a veteran like Halley's Comet, which has been hardened and baked by countless passages through the inner solar system. The orbital calculations told a different story. This was in all likelihood the comet's very first journey inward from the Oort cloud. This fact, this single piece of its biography, was perhaps the most crucial clue of all. The Oort cloud is a place almost beyond our imagining. It is a vast spherical shell of trillions of icy bodies, a ghostly halo surrounding our solar system that begins hundreds of times farther out than Pluto and extends perhaps a third of the way to the next star. For 4.5 billion years, 3I Atlas had existed in this realm of absolute cold and profound stillness. Out there, the sun is just the brightest star in the sky, its warmth utterly negligible. Temperatures hover only a few degrees above absolute zero. In this deep freeze, the comet's ice remained in its most primordial volatile state. It wasn't the hard, compacted ice we know on Earth. It was likely a delicate, porous, almost fluffy agglomeration of frozen water, carbon dioxide, methane and ammonia, interspersed with dust, a fragile scaffolding more akin to styrofoam than to rock. It was a cosmic antique, perfectly preserved from the dawn of the solar system, but also incredibly delicate. Then some ancient gravitational nudge, perhaps the gentle pull of a passing star or the tidal forces of the Milky Way galaxy itself, disturbed its multi-billion-year slumber and sent it on its long, slow fall toward the Sunday. This journey was its undoing. A comet from the Oort cloud making its first pass is like an Arctic creature suddenly transported to a desert. It is completely unprepared for the environment it is about to enter. Its highly volatile ices, which were stable in the deep freeze of the outer solar system, began to sublimate with explosive vigor as it approached the Sunday. This would have produced jets far more powerful and unpredictable than those of a more weathered comet, making a rapid, uncontrolled spin-up much more likely. Furthermore, its pristine, uncompacted structure offered little resistance to the Sun's relentless tidal forces. It lacked the hardened, crusty mantle that older comets develop after many solar passages. It was in essence a loosely packed snowball entering a furnace. Its destruction was not just possible. From a certain point of view, it was almost inevitable. It was simply too fragile, too pristine for this violent inner realm. This then was the final comprehensive verdict delivered by the scientific community. The death of Comet 3I, Atlas, was a multi-act tragedy, a conspiracy of forces. It began with the victim's own inherent nature, a delicate primordial body, a pristine visitor from the Oort cloud, unprepared for the rigors of the inner solar system. This intrinsic fragility made it uniquely susceptible to the two primary assailants. As it plunged sunward, the inexorable tidal forces of the Sun began to stretch and weaken its structure, like finding the grain in a piece of wood and preparing to split it. Simultaneously, the Sun's increasing warmth triggered violent asymmetrical outgassing from its volatile ices, forcing the comet into an ever faster self-destructive spin. The centrifugal forces built from within, while the tidal forces pulled from without. At some precise moment, around the 20th of April 2020, the combined stress became too much. A crack formed. It propagated through the fragile nucleus in an instant, and the ancient body, a survivor of billions of years in the cosmic deep, disintegrated into a cloud of insignificant debris. There was no alien megastructure. There was no impending second sun. There was only a beautiful, fragile, and ultimately doomed piece of solar system history. The prophecy born of hope and digital speculation had crumbled to dust alongside the object that inspired it. But in this death there was a different kind of revelation. In its brief, spectacular life and even more spectacular demise, 3I Atlas gave us an unprecedented gift. We had a front-row seat to the end of a comet's life, a process we had theorized about for decades, but had rarely observed with such clarity. It became the most intensely studied disintegrating comet in history. Its ghostly remains provided a laboratory for understanding the composition of primordial materials, for testing our models of rotational stress, for confirming the devastating power of tidal forces on these icy wanderers. Its legacy, therefore, is not one of failure. It did not fail to become a second sun. Instead, it succeeded brilliantly in becoming one of the most important cometary case studies of the 21st century. It taught us that the visitors from the deep are not always robust survivors, but can be ephemeral ghosts whose beauty is directly tied to their fragility. It reminded us that the solar system is not a static clockwork mechanism, but a dynamic and often violent place where creation and destruction are locked in an eternal dance. The scientific mystery of 3I, Atlas, was solved, its fate sealed not by prophecy but by physics. Yet its story leaves us with a deeper, more human puzzle. With the science so clear, why were so many of us for a few brilliant weeks so willing to look past the icy reality and see instead the fiery fulfillment of a dream? And so the celestial visitor departs, not with a triumphant blaze of glory, but with a quiet, dignified dissolution into cosmic dust. The spectacle that captivated a world that promised a second sun has resolved into a faint spectral trail of ice and memory, a dispersing ghost in the solar wind, its fiery potential unfulfilled. We watched, you and I, as it fragmented under the sun's relentless gaze, each piece a splinter of the grand promise it once held, a shattered syllable of a prophecy that would never be fully spoken. There was no cataclysm, no sign from a higher power, no apocalyptic dawn heralded by a new star in our heavens. Instead, there was only the cold, indifferent, and exquisitely beautiful dance of physics, a celestial body surrendering to the inexorable laws that govern the great silent emptiness between the worlds. The final images from our most powerful telescopes revealed not a harbinger, but a cosmic tragedy on a miniature scale, a fragile relic from the dawn of the solar system, pushed too far, too fast by the gravitational heart of our star. It was a poignant end to a journey that had begun billions of years ago in the frozen, dark cradle of the Oort cloud, a journey that intersected for one brief, brilliant moment with the hopes and fears of humanity. The silence that followed its disintegration was profound, a vacuum left not just in the sky, but in the global conversation it had ignited. Where once there were millions of voices speculating, debating and prophesying, there was now the quiet, methodical work of astronomers piecing together the final moments of Comet 3I, Atlas, translating its swan song into the precise language of orbital mechanics and sublimation rates. This stark dichotomy, this chasm between the feverish human narrative and the dispassionate celestial event, lies at the very heart of this entire saga. To truly understand what happened, we must look not only to the sky, but inward into the complex machinery of the human mind. Comet Atlas, in its brief and dramatic passage, became a kind of celestial Rorschach test, a vast, ambiguous shape onto which we projected our deepest anxieties and our most fervent desires. It arrived at a moment of global uncertainty, a time when the familiar structures of our world seemed fragile and the future felt profoundly unpredictable. Into this void of apprehension, the comet blazed a perfect vessel for meaning. Ancient texts, long dormant, were resurrected. Obscure prophecies, once the domain of a few, were amplified by the unprecedented power of social media, circumnavigating the globe in seconds. The second sun prophecy was not born of the comet itself. It was a story we were already desperate to tell ourselves, and Atlas simply provided the protagonist, the celestial actor, for our terrestrial drama. This phenomenon was a crucible, forging a modern myth in real time. It exposed the powerful primordial human instinct to seek patterns, to find agency and intention in the random clockwork of the cosmos. This tendency, known as apophenia, is not a flaw in our thinking, but a deeply embedded survival trait. Our ancestors scanning the savannah survived by assuming that a rustle in the grass was a predator, not just the wind. They connected the dots, even when no connection existed, because the cost of being wrong was far lower than the cost of missing a real threat. Today, we no longer scan the savannah, but we scan the heavens, and that same ancient software is still running in our minds. We look at a random scattering of stars and see a hunter, a bear, a queen. And when a truly anomalous event occurs, like the sudden brightening of a distant comet, that pattern-seeking engine kicks into overdrive, we search for correlations, for causes, for a grander narrative that can make sense of a universe that so often seems chaotic and indifferent. The architecture of the internet acted as a powerful accelerant for this process. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement identified the burgeoning interest and fed us more of what we seemed to want. Echo chambers formed, reinforcing the belief, insulating it from skeptical inquiry. A fringe idea could achieve the illusion of mainstream consensus overnight. Eyewitness accounts, often misinterpretations of atmospheric phenomena or other celestial bodies, were presented as irrefutable proof. Complex scientific data like light curves and orbital elements were stripped of their nuance and selectively reinterpreted to fit the prophetic narrative. The very language of science was co-opted, lending a veneer of legitimacy to claims that had no empirical foundation. What we witnessed was the collision of ancient neurology with modern technology, a perfect storm that transformed an intriguing astronomical event into a global cultural phenomenon, a schism in our shared reality. One part of the world saw an icy conglomerate on a predictable trajectory. The other saw the fulfillment of a divine or extraterrestrial plan. This is not a new story. It is a timeless human drama replayed with every generation. For our ancestors, comets were almost universally seen as omens, celestial swords hanging over the world, portents of war, famine, and the death of kings. The Bayeux Tapestry, chronicling the Norman conquest of England in 1066, prominently features Halley's comet, with the terrified English subjects pointing at what they believed was a dire warning of the impending invasion. They were, in a sense, correct. Their king did die and their country was conquered, but they mistook correlation for causation, a coincidence of timing for a cosmic decree. They failed to imagine a universe where a king could fall and a ball of ice could swing past the earth in the same year, entirely independent of one another. Their worldview lacked the scale to accommodate such magnificent indifference. Centuries later, as the scientific revolution dawned, we began to chart these visitors. Edmund Halley, using Newton's revolutionary laws of motion, did not see an omen, but a predictable recurring object, a member of our solar system bound by the same gravitational script as the planets. His successful prediction of the comet's return in 1758 was a monumental victory for reason, a demonstration that the heavens were not the whimsical realm of gods and portents, but a physical space governed by discoverable laws. It was a turning point in our cosmic consciousness. Yet the old ways of thinking never truly vanished. They simply retreated, waiting for the next bright messenger from the void. Even in the late 20th century, the beautiful comet Hale-Bopp, a genuinely spectacular sight, was tragically co-opted by a cult who saw it not as a natural wonder, but as a chariot to the afterlife. Comet 3I, Atlas, now takes its place in this long, complex history. It serves as a powerful reminder that scientific knowledge on its own is not always enough to dislodge deeply held beliefs, especially those that offer comfort, meaning, or a sense of control in a world that often feels bereft of them. The second sun prophecy provided its believers with a grand narrative, a sense of being part of a pivotal moment in history. It offered certainty in a time of doubt. Science, in contrast, offers something far less immediately gratifying, but infinitely more valuable: a process, a methodology for navigating uncertainty. It is a humble and iterative quest for understanding, built not on unshakable belief, but on a foundation of perpetual doubt. The triumph of the scientific method during the Atlas event was not loud or boastful. It was the quiet, collaborative work of thousands of astronomers, professional and amateur alike, spread across the globe, all pointing their instruments at the same faint smudge of light. They shared their data openly, their observations, their calculations. When the comet began to behave unexpectedly, they did not declare it a supernatural event. Instead, they posed new questions. Was the nucleus rotating too quickly? Was it undergoing a series of thermal explosions? Was its internal structure inherently weak? Their debates played out not in cryptic prophecies, but in scientific circulars and research papers. Their conclusions were tentative, subject to revision as new evidence emerged. The ultimate discovery that the comet was disintegrating was not a failure of prediction, but a stunning success of the observational process. It was science working exactly as it should, observing a phenomenon, developing hypotheses based on known principles, gathering more data, and refining the explanation until it matched the reality of what was happening hundreds of millions of kilometers away. This process, this patient, meticulous, and honest pursuit of knowledge, is one of the greatest achievements of our species. It is our most reliable tool for peeling back the layers of the cosmos and gazing upon the authentic, unvarnished beauty of the universe. So where do we go from here? The fragments of Atlas will continue on their long, dark journey, fading back into the obscurity from which they came. But the questions it raised will linger in our atmosphere for a long time. This comet was a fire drill for our collective sense-making abilities. It has shown us our vulnerabilities, the ease with which misinformation can propagate, and the profound, persistent appeal of mythological thinking. But it has also shown us our strengths, our boundless curiosity, our technological ingenuity, and our capacity for global scientific collaboration. The future will undoubtedly bring us more celestial surprises. There will be other comets, perhaps even brighter than Atlas ever promised to be. There will be unexpected asteroid flybys, dazzling meteor showers, and perhaps one day a supernova visible in our daytime sky. Each of these events will be another test, another opportunity to choose between the seductive simplicity of prophecy and the challenging but rewarding path of inquiry. The choice we make will depend on the intellectual toolkit we have at our disposal. Fostering scientific literacy is not merely an academic exercise, it is an act of civilizational self-defense. It is about equipping ourselves and our children with the critical thinking skills necessary to distinguish credible sources from fabricated ones, to understand the difference between a scientific theory and a wild conjecture, and to appreciate the provisional nature of knowledge. It is not about destroying wonder or replacing it with cold, hard facts. Quite the opposite. A true scientific education reveals a universe far more strange, more beautiful, and more awe-inspiring than any ancient prophecy could ever have conceived. It replaces the fear of the unknown with a thrilling curiosity to explore it. It teaches us that the story of a comet's life and death, the intricate physics of its outgassing nucleus, and the chemistry of its tail, is a tale more magnificent than any myth we could invent for it. We stand at a unique crossroads in human history. We have the power to see farther, to understand more deeply, and to communicate more rapidly than any generation before us. The saga of Comet 3I, Atlas, has shown us that this power is a double-edged sword. It can be used to spread unsubstantiated fear and fantasy, or it can be used to unite us in a shared project of discovery. The path we choose will define our future relationship with the cosmos. Will we continue to see the sky as a screen for our terrestrial dramas, a mirror reflecting only ourselves, or will we finally learn to see it for what it truly is, a window onto a vast and ancient universe, a universe that does not exist for us but of which we are a tiny, sentient and incredibly fortunate part? The stars do not write our destiny. They do, however, invite us to write our own, a story of curiosity, courage, and the unending search for truth.